Baseball got in a month or so of spring training before the pandemic shut down the sport, but now it's back. Earlier this week, Major League Baseball announced its return. Owners and players had squabbled over terms, mostly financial, and really didn't get much settled. But that storyline is over for the moment. Now we're back to talking about the game. This is SportsBeat KC for Thursday, June 25th. I'm Blair Kirchhoff, and today we talk with Royals beat writer Lynn Worthy and Star columnist Sam Mellinger about how the game's new parameters fit the Royals. Here we go with Lynn and Sam. So I was hoping for a scene where maybe Rob Manfred and Tony Clark would be sitting at a table, and they'd each sign something, and then they'd shake hands, stand up and shake hands, and the cameras would be clicking, and maybe they even put an arm around each other, and there'd be peace in the land and harmony, and that's how we would go into the baseball season. Instead,
did you actually want baseball?
Baseball issued a statement on 2020 on Monday night and saying basically that says, despite all the disagreements, we're going to play baseball anyway. So that's the good news. Baseball's happening. I'm happy that baseball is happening. We're all happy that it's occurring, but it certainly doesn't bode well for the future. But that's, you know what, we can talk about that on SportsBeat KC on February 19th, 2021.
That's exactly right.
But for today, we are going to talk about getting back into the swing of things, pun intended. And Lynn, let's just start breaking it down. 60-game season for everybody. Let's just take a quick moment and say what that means. Let's start with like pitching. What is that going to mean for a rotation, or with this kind of sprint to the finish of a regular season? Do you envision 5-man rotations or just bullpens? How is it going to work with a 60-game season?
I mean, I think you still might see the 5-man rotation. I mean, the time that they broke camp, the Royals were still up in the air on who their 5th guy was going to be. But I mean, I think just because of the pacing of the schedule, you still probably need at least a 5-man group. Or, I mean, I guess you could in theory go with more. I just don't know if that's something they'd be equipped for, or have an appetite for. But I think the pacing is going to be pretty similar to what you would have over a course of 162 games, just sort of truncated. But it'll be interesting to see how stretched out they can get guys by the time they start the season, considering this delay, and whether or not you're going to have a lot more games where guys maybe only go 4 or 5 innings and then you're diving right into the bullpen because you need to stop whatever might be starting right away in these games when every game is going to matter that much more. I mean, 60 games is that's just a little bit of a stretch as opposed to a full season. So I mean, you every game is going to be almost, or it could be managed as though it's almost a playoff atmosphere or importance, because you get, one bad stretch and that might be it. This might be one of those seasons where you can't win it right out the gate, but you could lose it.
Well, I believe that's happened locally over the last couple of years. I don't have the 2019 game by game in front of me. Probably could call that up pretty quickly, but I don't know what the Royals were out of the gate last year. But it does seem like in the last couple of years, when they've lost 100+ games, that the starts were just abysmal. And you're right. There's with this shortened season, there is no slow start if you have hopes of a playoff. And Sam, to hear Dayton Moore, there are hopes of a playoff. This is going to. You can make a case, I think, to look at this season in a different way. And you and I talked about that last week on a show that what can a team like the Royals get out of this season as a developing team? But Dayton Moore has said, no, this is playoffs are the objective here. Is that should it be?
Yeah, well, first, I did just look it up. The Royals were a cool 19-41 after 60 last year. So
probably not going to get them into the playoffs.
No, I think that would be just shy of the second wild card. But it should be the stated goal, right? And I think that Dayton has always kind of walked but just a sort of a precarious public tightrope with this of saying our goal is to compete. We're going to compete, championship, all that stuff. But internally knowing how important developing is. Now there's a ton of nuance here. Dayton and JJ and Renee and, all those guys believe that the way that you win is to develop, the way that you develop is to win. So these things are kind of tied together. But I do think that, sort of just back in what Lynn just said, I mean, it's literally true that each game in a 60-game season is worth almost 3 times as much as one game in a 162-game season. And, there's more room for flukes, right? I think Fangraphs gave the Royals a 0.3% chance of making the playoffs when the world was normal. And now I think it's like 14 point something. So, this can happen, small sample sizes will rule 2020. So I think they should go for it, but I don't think they're going to be disappointed if they don't make it. To me, it's all, and I know I'm on the extreme on this, and I have a big disagreement with the Royals front office. It's a respectful disagreement, but still, I think everything should be geared. Every single decision should be what makes us better for 2021 and 2022. I think you use this to develop. Lynn was talking about pitch counts and stuff. The Royals can actually, I think, are in a pretty good position, or at least, a better position relative to the teams they're competing against in terms of, workloads, because, so much of their future is tied up in all these pitching prospects. Teams are this is something we'll talk about on February 19th, 2021. But, somebody's going to lead the league in innings with like 80 innings, something like that. Teams don't like to jump more than 20 or 30%. So that's going to be a thing that we're going to talk about next year. And I think the Royals can sort of buffer against that now by, they've already been managing, sort of workout pitching. I understand that's not the same as game pitching, but they're in a position to use this as a development in a way that I think some other clubs might not be.
What about, Lynn, the make? We'll drill down into position battles and what the roster is going to end up looking like in future podcasts. But just overall, the roster composition, is there enough talent on this roster to win 60% of your games, or 55%? And I saw this yesterday that the best 60-game record in Royals history is 45-15, and the worst is 15-45. So. And that's in 52 years, 51 years, whatever it is of Royals history. But is there, there is some star power on this team, and you get the AL home run champ, the AL champ in hit, or Major League champ in hits, and is there enough for this team to have a 60-game burst of success?
I think there's potentially enough for them to at least be, to be in the mix there, to be in the running. I mean, assuming guys perform, particularly some of the guys who are coming back, because, not to go too far into, the nitty gritty of the roster. But, I mean, you think about Salvi and Mondi coming back this year, added to, Soler having the year that he had last year. And so, I mean, you feel like you have, at least in the lineup, should be deeper than what it had been last year. I know they really think that the bullpen this year has a chance to be really good. So, I mean, I think you look at what they've got just overall roster-wise, and I mean, as any year, there's probably some guys who are some question marks, and depending on which way they go, whether they overperform, underperform, or if they're just sort of like in that middle, probably has a big factor in the overall roster, how much better than expectation or maybe under expectation that the whole group ends up being. But I don't think you look at their roster and say, yeah, that's a team that's just it's just not, and especially in 60 games. I mean, heck, the Nationals wouldn't have made the name playoffs last year in 60 games, won the World Series. So, I mean, in 60 games, I think you got to be pretty bad to just say there's no shot.
Right. Or the Royals in 2014, I don't believe would have made the playoffs after 60
they would
games.
Not.
So,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And Lynn, you mentioned this, and it's a bit of a silver lining. I mean, the injury recovery time for Mondi and for Salvi extended with all this. I I got to think there's every hope that they're going to be back at as 100%. Is that
Yeah.
has Dayton addressed that?
Yeah, I mean, we had asked about that throughout this break, but I asked about, just because, guys separated for however long this has been, a couple of months now. But yeah, yesterday I asked, I should say Wednesday, because people could be listening to whatever day, but Wednesday I asked, and Dayton said, yeah, there's no health issues, aside from coronavirus, no health issues with any of the guys who are going to be reporting to camp next week.
Okay, well let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about some other specific issues about the 2020 Major League Baseball season that we think will begin. July is 23-24 will be opening days with a spring training 2.0 starting next week at Kauffman Stadium. We'll be right back. Hey, it's Blair. We have a special subscription offer for SportsBeat KC listeners. Unlimited digital access to the Kansas City Star's award-winning sports coverage. Sign up now for 1 year of Sports Pass for access to all the sports news, features, and columns presented on the kansascity.com site, and it's only $30. That's a 40% savings off our regular rate. Your subscription will automatically renew after the initial term at $50 unless you tell us to cancel. Your subscription helps support the sports coverage of kansascity.com and the Kansas City Star, and that support has never been more important. Please visit kansascity.com/SportsBeatKC offer to get this special offer. And as always, thanks for listening. We're back with Lynn Worthy, the Royals beat writer for the Kansas City Star, and Star columnist Sam Mellinger. All right, so baseball's back. Loving it. Lynn, you mentioned this right before we went to break that you brought up the coronavirus, the COVID-19, and testing is a big part of all this. What do we know about the frequency of testing and safety precautions that Major League Baseball is going to insist on?
Yeah, well, so everybody's going to need to test negative before they start workouts, and then once they get into camp working out. It's going to be every other day on the testing. It's supposed to be once a month for the antibody tests, and believe the every other day is going to be for coaches, staff, players, support staff. So that's going to continue throughout the regular season and the postseason, every other day.
Wow, every other day. Okay, and I guess other information like this will reveal itself as we get closer to the season, but just how the team travels and
Yeah, and they're still sorting through. I mean, because it's not a bubble, so they're going to travel. It's not going to be complete isolation. And I should also they will be doing the temperature checks twice a day too. But yeah, once the season gets rolling, it's going to be it's going to be a lot on guys' individual responsibility to sort of stay clear of suspect situations, or to try and do what they should social distancing wise and all that sort of stuff. But they're not going to bubble wrap these guys.
Which has not been happening in some other sports, as we've seen recently, college football being one, and professional soccer being another. And we've also had some teams that have been affected by the COVID-19. I guess the Phillies, Blue Jays, some other teams as well. Hey, Sam, there's some new rules implemented this year, just for this year. What do you think about starting a runner at second base?
I hate it.
In extra inning.
Yeah.
No. Tell us. No, really. What do you think?
It just seems like carnival to me. I legitimately, like in my soul, I hate it. I also understand it. I understand the need to stay away from 16 inning games and to try and get it done. And I understand that baseball, I think, should be experimenting like never before. Like whoever wins this World Series. Like, it's going to be, you're going to have takes about, like, is this World Series champion more or less legitimate than the Houston Astros? Like, that's something that people are going to talk about. So you might as well experiment a little bit. And they've been using this rule in the minor leagues, so I get it to some extent. But the stuff that I'd like to see, and maybe I'm just being weird or on my own here, but electronic strike zone. I'd like to see that, like what that looks like. Pitch clocks, like, actually enforced. Little things like that. I'd be interested in seeing. The runner on second thing just seems really goofy to me. It seems really, really goofy to me. At that point, why not just make it a tie?
Right. Put a tie on the books.
Yeah.
It strikes me that you don't think so, Lynn?
Well, I was just gonna say he's, the runner at second thing I'm not a big fan of, but then you went with the pitch clock, and I'm like, the pitch clock just doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't do much for me. I've sat through a lot of minor league games where they had the pitch clock and they still went 3+ hours, and I'm like, well, this ain't really do anything. I mean, maybe it's just my own experience there, but the pitch clock thing. I mean, like, yeah, in theory, I guess it's supposed to speed up the game, but I just have seen it in practice not really do a whole lot. I'm just like, what is? To me, it's guys throwing strikes and, especially relievers coming in and throwing strikes is what's going to make that move. But the pitch clock didn't really do much for me.
Well, I guess I like the spirit of Sam's answer, though, that, I think about some other sports where, in college football, sometimes they'll use bowl games for some rules experiments. And in college basketball, they'll use the postseason NIT to fiddle around with, like, the 3-point line or other foul, number of fouls in a game, that sort of thing. I guess it just depends on whether you look at this as a championship season in the way that we've looked at every other baseball season. There won't be a season that has been a regular season with fewer games than the 2020 baseball season. And there have been shortened seasons before, but none as few as 20 games. So I guess it's how we end up defining is this a true championship season for baseball? But there is another experimental. The universal DH is happening, I believe. Is that right? Both leagues are going to use the DH.
Yep.
I don't know if there are any baseball purists here. I know, Sam, you and I talked about it last week. And Lynn, are you good with both leagues going with the DH?
I mean, I do like the pitcher hitting. I mean, I guess it is. It's probably been outdated for a while, and I think from a player standpoint, it probably gives you, in theory, an extra job, or keeps a guy, who's at the point where he's not really viable in the field, gives him a chance to still be on the roster as a DH and have an impact. I mean, I think about the Mets and Yoenis Cespedes, as a guy who probably that helps maybe extend his career. So I mean, there's benefits to it, but I guess I'm just I'd like that difference between the American and National League. But definitely in a year like this, I do see where there's benefit to experimenting with that.
Yeah. So when it comes to rosters, they're going to start the season with 30. And pare it down by 2 over the following 2-week periods to eventually get to 26. Does that? I guess you have to do that, don't you? You've got to have some, and then there's a taxi squad of 20 additional players that'll be available. That makes sense, doesn't it, Lynn?
Yeah. That's, I mean, and you're, people were talking about how many players there are going to be, weeks back, and it's, between virus and injury and just the normal, the way baseball works, you're going to need more than whatever 30 guys. It's just not going to work with 30 guys. Plus, you got to have guys ready or staying ready where there's, likely no minor league season happening this year. You got to have somewhere where guys are ready, and you can't just be calling guys off the couch and saying, all right, you're in.
Right. Okay, so like we said, season starts July 23-24. The second part of spring training, which will start in the summer, next Wednesday in Kansas City at Kauffman Stadium, and do we have word on fans yet? I know there's a month to go before the season starts, and a Royals official told me last week they're planning for fans, but I think everybody has to plan for fans and then change plans if the news changes, and the news is not good here the last week or so when it comes to virus numbers, nationally and in Missouri. So What's the story, Lynn, on fans?
As of right now, it's still the plan that they would be starting off with nobody in the ballpark. But they have not, come out one way or another to say that there won't be no fans all season. And then you've got other teams in other states who came out and said that they plan on fans. Texas, which has experienced a spike in cases recently, has been steadfast for, I think, a few weeks now that they plan on some fans in the stands by the end of the season. So it's going to be one of those things that evolves as the season goes along. But to start off, there won't be fans in the stands. It'll be a TV sport. And then, as they get later in the season, they may look at some things. But that's going to have to go through the state and local officials and guidelines.
Yeah, gee, I don't know how that's going to work. That's complicated, and there's a lot of considerations to be had there before we go there.
Well, one part about that though, it's not up to the teams in that way, right? Like, just to again like echo or emphasize something Lynn just mentioned. It's local officials, it's CDC, it's all these other guidelines that are sure as hell above Kevin Ulick and Dayton Moore's head. These are people that live in that world. But one thing about the Royals, there are some, I won't say some teams necessarily, but there are certainly some officials, executives with some teams who want no fans no matter what, who want to play, just for safety. The Royals are very much definitely not one of those. If they are allowed to have fans, I think they want to push to have fans.
Yeah, I did hear Dayton Moore say that yesterday, that we play the game for the fans.
Yeah.
And he's right. But at least, as Lynn said in the beginning, it may just be a television product, and we'll have to live with that. So of course, as soon as the announcement was made that baseball is back, and the number of games was set. Hey, first of all, before I talk about the over/under for the Royals, one thing that disappointed me, I would love to have seen an expanded postseason. Now, maybe that's because of where we live and the team that we cover, and if you're a Dodgers fan or a Yankees fan, you're fine with the same number of the same 5 teams from each league being in the postseason. Don't you think baseball would have been better served with an expanded postseason, you guys?
I do. Yeah. I mean, again, sort of. The season, nobody's going to remember this season as fully legitimate, no matter what. Even assuming that we have there's a team that at the end of the season wins that piece of metal, as Rob Manfred might call it. But I just feel like, like when in doubt, experiment with this. And I do think it might have been fun just to have an extra round. And that, I don't care about this nearly as much, but it would have given the owners and potentially the players some more money. But it just would have been fun.
And I think, go ahead, Lynn.
Yeah, I was going to say for this year, I think it would have been, it could have been a good thing for this year. I'm a little skeptical about the long term, because they had talked about expanding playoffs, on a more permanent basis. And the one thing I wonder about that is if, in a normal year, if the number of playoff teams expanding to where it's like more than half, basically more than half the league, because they're talking about you could end up with 16 playoff teams in a 30-team league. Whether it becomes the thing where, it becomes a little bit of an excuse for teams to be like, to say they were competitive and they were a playoff team without necessarily, doing a whole lot to try and improve the team or spending and that sort of thing. So I just wonder long term if that's, what that actually does when you have more than half the league. But for this year, I think it would have been a good idea.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's end it on this. Just a quick thought. The consensus over under I've seen for the Royals, 24.5. So that gives them a 24.5 and 35.5 record for the season. Over or under, Sam?
So that is, I did the math just because I'm a huge nerd, and that is about a 66 win pace for 162. So that would be 66 and 96.
Which would mark how many game improvement over last year, right?
8, right? 7 or 8. I get the 104 loss season mixed up with the 103 loss season sometimes. You know what? Baseball's back. Let's be optimistic. I'm going to say over. I'm going to say the these power arms that they have in the bullpen are going to make a difference. Because I really do believe, I don't know if I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, but I really do believe that if the Royals had just a competent, now I'm not talking about a great, but just a competent bullpen, it would have made a huge difference last year. So I'll go over.
Sure. Okay, Lynn, what do you think?
I'm going over too. I mean, I think in a large part because I think the way the schedule is going to break out, they're not going to have too many of those big juggernaut teams. They're not going to play those, so they're going to be playing the same group of teams. Basically Central. And I think not that they're way above the rest of the teams in either of the Central divisions, but I think that's a better matchup than if they were playing the Yankees and the Dodgers or either the East or the West. I think the Central is pretty good for them.
What about you, Blair?
Well, first of all, I think over as well by a game or two. I don't think they'll finish 500, but it's a good point Lynn makes because we should have brought that up. The schedule, the Royals will only play, and all baseball teams will only play teams in their division and the corresponding division in the other league. So, and that's not out yet. We'll be sometime next week, I think, is what I saw. So look for that. It'd be interesting to see where the Royals start, on the road or at home, or I think they were going to open in Chicago this year for the regular season. But we'll see. We'll see.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Hey, Lynn Worthy, Sam Mellinger, thanks guys for joining us today, and we will talk to you again soon.
All right, Blair.
Thanks.
That'll do it for today. Thanks to our production staff of Derek Donovan, Savannah Smith, Randy Mason, Beth Welsh, Jeff Rosen, and Chris Fickett. Tip of the cap to Lynn Worthy and to Sam Mellinger for talking Royals. Links to stories about the Royals can be found in the show notes and on the True Blue app. Earlier in the episode, you heard me talk about the Sports Pass offer. It still stands, still a good one, $30 for a year's worth of sports coverage that includes Sports Extra with the e-edition. There are 20 additional pages of national sports coverage today. Here's an even better offer. Buy the entire Kansas City Star product. Sports, news, features, commentary, analysis, the whole thing. You get all the stories written by my talented colleagues, plus extra news, sports, and business coverage. The details can be found at account.kansascity.com/subscribe. That's account.kansascity.com/subscribe. And whether it's the Sports Pass or the full subscription, you're getting and supporting the best sports and news coverage in Kansas City and helping us produce programs like SportsBeat KC. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back tomorrow, Friday, with another episode.